Bula, salam, and namaste from Fiji Islands. I'm Suvishna Singh from the University of Fiji, and the presentation today is a joint one with Mr. Sailesh Narayan, who is also from the university. The presentation focuses on the key question of how labor exploitation and migration affect women migrants' agency. As such, the attempt will be to answer the aforementioned question to the best of our understanding. Now, the history of migration is as old as the history of humanity. Humans, since the very beginning, have migrated to build a new, more promising existence elsewhere. Stephen Castles and Mark J. Miller, authors of a book titled The Age of Migration, write, and I quote, "Migration has become a private solution to a public problem," unquote. Migrants depart from their home countries as a result of political subjugation, warfare, or extreme levels of poverty. Migration, specifically labor migration, has become gradually more feminized. The astonishingly towering number of females migrating is the latest global movement. In the past, it was primarily men who migrated to countries far away. Women were merely followers. However, women too now migrate with the hopes of earning well and securing a blissful future, most of all for their families. The migration of women is not always a choice. Unfavorable state of affairs leaves many with no option but to leave behind the domestic sphere as caretakers and actively take charge as main providers. Many have developed into key single wage earners of their families. According to Saskia Sossen, a Dutch American sociologist, and I quote, "This is the feminization of survival," unquote. Societies, states, and governments undeniably depend on the work of women in the labor force. However, the definition of the concept of feminization of migration has obtained a great deal of challenges over the past years. Having received many critics over these years has resulted in no one specific definition of it. Thus, the definitions exist as many as the critics. It is therefore crucial to delineate a fine line between the feminization of migration process and the feminized viewpoints on migration. Many migration researchers have defined the so-called feminization of migration as a contemporary phenomenon which depicts female migrants equating to or even exceeding the male ratio. Few other research scholars have defined feminization of migration in relations to the absolute growth in the visibility of women within the totality of international migrants relative to that of women within the past decades rather than men. Nevertheless, the growth has to be a significant one rather than minute so as to justify feminization of international migration. It needs to be comprehended that women have always been on the move, but their experiences had not been brought out from the shadow to achieve a more just environment for female migrants. Historically, migrants have been for long portrayed as male breadwinners by migration scholarships. The common understanding of a migrant back in the 19th and mid 20th centuries was a young male who dreamt of better opportunities. Simply said, feminization of migration scholars restricted the existence of women in researches to wives migrating with children as passive companions for spouses, fathers, and brothers. This neglected the imperative role of women as independent migrants. Despite the gaps in the early gender and migration studies, these studies, to some extent, managed to successfully bring the focus on women. Their role visibilities increased, along with the issue of gender relations. As much as academic literature in the past wrote about migration, some of these works were far from female migration. Some narratives, for instance, represented migration as a liberating avenue which freed women from suffocating family control and unjust gender roles, especially when women became breadwinners abroad. Women, due to this, were seen as heroes, while on the other hand, female migrants were exhibited as unvarying victims of exploitation, prejudice, and mistreatment. Many of these migrants were and still are exposed to violence, whereby, in a bulk of host countries, mainly the Middle East, domestic female workers have their passports seized on arrival and are forced to become entirely reliant on the employer. The situation aggravates to an extent whereby most of them are poorly paid or not even at all for the hard labor done, working 7 days a week until late nights, come rain or sunshine, and suffering serious brutality, which negatively progresses to rape and mental torture, becoming the ill fate of many women. These female migrants become caged prisoners in their psyches and have no means of escape. Moreover, they are plunged in the dark world of flesh trading, sent to neighboring countries to make prostitution not a part of life, but life itself. Furthermore, this results in forced pregnancies, serious bodily harm, and the spread of sexually transmitted infections amongst displaced migrant females. Dreams and hopes for a decent and well deserved present and future are strangled by the chains of exploitation. Shelter of protection seems far from sight, and the journey is a long and difficult one away from the homeland and loved ones. Therefore, the risk of helplessness has extended beyond borders instead of being confined only within the household. Now, I wish to give this time to my dear colleague Sailesh to move forward with our presentation. Thank you, Sailesh.
Thank you, Ms. Suvishna. Dear friends, my colleague has very skillfully enshrouded upon the question for our presentation. And in addition, I will be dissecting the second half of the question, which basically will entail the women migrants agency and how it is affected. To begin with, feminist research argues that this vulnerability is gendered and affects men and women differently. Gender in a cross-cutting migration issue, and perhaps one of the single most important factor shaping migratory experiences. Migrants are positioned differently within labor markets, as the labor demand is often gathered according to economic sectors. It is vital to comprehend that gender specificities change over time and are significantly influenced by the migration experience. Thus, gender is a dynamic notion which not only defines the difference between men and women, but also points to how these differences are created, evolve, and play out throughout migration. International Labour Organization in its article states, and I quote, "Women migrant workers are exposed at numerous levels based on gender, race, color, and ethnicity," unquote. These levels have gone to a heightened degree, and since it is a matter of a human being, such discrepancies need to be eliminated so that every migrant worker, especially women, have the freedom to make choices accordingly. Now, being exposed to such factors will always put women migrants at risk, which will dampen their agency. The term agency needs to be comprehended with a clear conscience, so that one can know how a woman feels when agencies are treaded upon. The woman migrants agencies theory, an account of their capacity for individualized choices and actions, which basically entails a woman's ability to identify goals or make choices and then act upon them, will for sure bring out many changes if followed. Kabir in her article speculates, women can exercise agency in many different ways, as individuals and collectively within the family, and through their participation in markets, politics, and other formal and informal networks. Kabir also states that agency can take a number of forms, for example, bargaining and negotiation, deception and manipulation, subversion and resistance, as well as it is more tangible, cognitive processes of reflection and analysis. Every woman as such should be in a position to practice her own rights so that they get the best of the decision of becoming a migrant worker. But if they are not given the opportunity to succeed or freedom of choice, they will definitely crumble under the norms of the patriarchal societies. Moreover, women have their own desires in social, cultural, political and economical context, a democratic right which every individual has, the longevity of their desire to be as free to be recognized not only in the arena where they are working, but in all other compartments as well. And as such, these elements need rigorous viewing, which will allow migrant women's contentment. The agency of a migrant woman plays a huge role in all of the above spheres. It can be viewed that there is a dire need for empowerment. Ghosh in his article states, hiring and promoting talented women is the right thing for the society. It is an economic imperative. Now, Ghosh also says, who is a chairman of the renowned Nissan Alliance, believes that gender should not be the barrier to hold back flourishment of migrant workers, especially the women, but clothe them with the privileges that they deserve. In addition, social context, whereby many migrant women agencies are buried by the overarching patriarchal norms, which is spread over every section of lives and the world. The women migrants in numerous cases or scenarios are not given much freedom as men. They tend to be concentrated in a more limited number of occupations that in one way or the other restrict their movements, or rather their freedom, limiting their opportunities to build networks or to access information and social support. Now, the potential development contributions of women migrants are constrained by their heightened vulnerability to precarious employment with insufficient levels of social protection. Also, cultural context whereby human communication occurs is perhaps the most defining influence on human interaction. Culture provides the overall framework wherein humans learn to organize their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in relation to their environment. But if the migrant women are not given their right to promote their own culture, then again their agency is affected. The attributes of women migrants in the cultural context needs to be viewed because they surely will be having those rich cultural assets that may be beneficial to the organizations they are employed in. Adding to the list is political context, which does not necessarily link to leadership roles, but how women migrants are mostly employed in low skill, low paid, and informal sectors. Each of these three elements creates a triple jeopardy for women migrant workers, acting to further undervalue and undermine their work. The political context also highlights how migrant women are exploited. Many employers do not lay down the accurate rules. They hide information and manipulate these women to their advantage. It basically involves their entry and exit in contractual forms, and it in one way is a political notion. Subsequently, economical context, which primarily is where every migrant worker moves from its place of origin to destinations in order to improve their quality of life, which includes seeking higher wage rates, better employment opportunities, a higher standard of living, and educational opportunities. Now, Tuan Somavia, the Director General of International Labour Organization, said, and I quote, "Migrants are an asset to every country where they bring labor. Let us give them the dignity they deserve as human beings and respect them as they deserve. These migrant workers fill the immediate employment needs of a country and also often take less desirable positions, including domestic service work. The presence of migrant workers means that more people are able to access goods and services, more money circulates in the economy, supply and demand is increased, and the profits are increased. But how beneficial it is to the migrant women workers. In the destination countries and territories, these migrant women are making a positive contribution to the health and well-being of others as they work in many different sectors. These migrant women fill the unmet needs for long-term care in our aging societies, in our buttress health and social care systems. But how are their own health taken care of? Are they able to access the services they need? If not, why not? What can be done about it? What happens to the health and the care situation for the families that they leave behind? The Girmit era women were also exploited to the extreme by the overseers for satisfaction of their lustful desires during the indenture system. Greedy eyes, inhumane thoughts, and the arrogance of superiority, and above all, the intentions that made these overseers work out plans to separate husbands and wives to get advantages over them. An important example is the story of two characters, Kunti and Narayan, who, in challenging situations of being molested and forced to work, resisted. But are all migrant women able to resist such behaviors? The women, in addition, were tasked to work in areas far away from their husbands, far away from where the husbands would work. During the day, these men of no humanity would go and abuse and even rape the women. Such was the scenario during those days, and it is on a higher level contemporarily. To conclude the presentation, one can deduce that migration and labor exploitation has greatly affected women migrants' agency. It has damaged their guard of a woman in numerous ways, such as in social, cultural, political, and economical contexts. Their agency has been dented to a great degree as it was prevalent during the Girmit era, which gave employees much leverage to jeopardize the lives of women. Every migrant's agency is important to ponder upon and make the appropriate changes to retain humanity. Thank you.